This video looks at some of the options for adding fields into templates, which will enable the adding of coded information into the patient record. We'll focus on clinical code, code pick list, code browser, value pick list, and yes/no prompts. To select an item from the data entry components panel, you simply drag and drop it into the desired section of the template builder. If you have more than one page, make sure the appropriate page is selected. If you have more than one section in that page, make sure you drop the selected component into the correct section. Dragging and dropping clinical code into a section will bring up the properties box. Firstly, find your code by clicking on the spyglass, which brings up the SNOMED CT code browser. Here, search for the code you want to use. Once you've selected the code, you have the opportunity to change how the wording of the code is displayed on the template. This doesn't affect the code itself or the way it'll be displayed in the patient's record once it's saved. It just changes the prompt that the user will see when they're completing the template. So make sure you don't change this to something that might be misleading. It must clearly represent what's being added to the patient's record. You may choose to leave it as it is. There are then a selection of optional properties that you can assign to each prompt. The user can be given the opportunity to add free text associated with the code that they've just added. You can add some default free text that will automatically be displayed in the free text box and which the user will be able to keep, edit or type over. I'll type in default text for demo here just so you can see how it displays to the user. Ticking here will add a calendar to enable the user to select a date that's different from the consultation date, which is the default. The prompt for time option only appears for particular codes. Ticking here will mean that the user must complete the field, otherwise they'll not be able to save the template. Use this carefully, and only instances where particular data must be recorded every time that template is used. It's worth noting here that when using the template, it's not actually clear to the user when fields are mandatory. There's no asterisk next to them, for example. So what some users will do is add to the text in the prompt field to show that this is a mandatory field. It's also possible to have a field automatically selected whenever the template is used. For example, if you have a medication review template, you might start with the code medication review done and have it selected automatically. The user will actually be able to unselect it if they wish when using the template. Calculations and groupings will be covered in separate videos in this bundle. If you want a tooltip to appear when the user hovers over the code in the template, then you add some text for that here. I'll add some here so we can see what it looks like. The final section to complete, and this is a mandatory property, so you must complete it for all clinical code components, is the consultation section. Every code that's added in a template will be displayed in the consultation record that the template is part of. And as consultations are built up of different sections, problem, assessment, examination, comment, etc., we need to configure here which of those sections this code is going to be displayed in when we save the template and the data is saved into the consultation. Selecting this drop-down gives the list of consultation sections available to you, and you select the one you feel is most appropriate for this code. When you're done, click OK, and the properties for that clinical code entry component will be saved. You can see a summary of what you've just added, including this tooltip that we added, the type of entry component, in this case a clinical code, single item, the prompt, the code itself, the fact that we selected date prompt, made it mandatory, added a free text box, and have the field checked by default. And on the right, we can see the consultation section that we selected. We can change any of these properties by right-clicking and selecting Properties, or going to the Properties option in the ribbon. Lastly, if you do drop a component into the wrong section, you can drag and drop it into the correct section once you've created it. You can also use the Move Up and Move Down arrows in the ribbon to change the order of your pages, whole sections, make sure you select the section header to do this, or individual components. Both drag and drop and move up and move down work within a section, but you must use drag and drop between sections. The next component to look at is the code pick list. As the name suggests, this will let us create a picking list of chosen codes that the user will be able to select from. Drag and drop the component into the appropriate section. And now, instead of searching for just the single code as we did for the clinical code component, we can list multiple codes. Click on the spyglass and search for the codes. You can select multiple codes in the browser here, and when you select OK, they will all be displayed. You can go back to the spyglass to add more codes. And once all your codes have been selected and are displayed here, you can alter the order in which they appear by using the up and down arrows here, or delete any that you no longer want. Add the prompt that will appear in the template. Then select from the properties list, which contains elements that are the same as the clinical code component properties that we talked about earlier, like the ability to add a free text field with or without default text, the option to have a date field that the user can change, the option to make the field mandatory, the tooltip text option, and then there's the mandatory consultation section. But we also have a field that will enable the user to pick more than one item from the list of codes. By default, users can only select one code from these lists. So if you want them to be able to select more than one, then we can do that here. As with the clinical code component, you can see the details of the item you've just added, and you can edit the properties via the ribbon or right-click. Another way to present a group of codes for the user to select from is to use the code browser component. This requires you to select a point in the SNOMED CT code hierarchy as a starting point, which will display to the user, allowing them to browse through all the codes underneath that point in the hierarchy. So if we take the housing example again, I might choose the code Residence and Accommodation Circumstances, which has a large number of possible codes underneath it. In the template, the user will be able to browse through all the codes below this code and select one, but they will not be able to browse elsewhere in the code hierarchy. So I've limited what they can add in this field to only coded items from this point downwards in the hierarchy. As with the code pick list component, we've got the option to let the user pick more than one code for this item, as well as the other standard properties and the mandatory consultation section selection. Before we look at the last two items, let's run test template to see how it's working. Here's the clinical code item, which I also marked as a mandatory field, having added that into the prompt text to make it clearer to the user that they must fill in this in order to be able to save the template. It's ticked by default as per the properties that I configured. The date prompt, free text field with the default free text in it, the code pick list with a drop-down list of codes. I can pick from the list and change the date and add text. Then I can return to the list to pick another. Then we have the code browser component. If I click on the spyglass, I'm taken to the point in the hierarchy where I'm allowed to browse from. Or I could have selected the drop-down list, which will display a list of all the codes in order. I'll close this test template runner and let's take a look at the last two components in this video, value code pick list and yes/no prompts, both of which provide ways of adding codes to the record. To add a value pick list item, drag and drop the component into the template. This lets you select a code that has a value attached to it and create a picking list that will provide a written description for each of the selected values. For example, if we select the code for pain score, this code, when added to a patient's record, will prompt for a value of between 0 and 10. If we want to give the user more guidance as to what each of these values corresponds to, for example, 0 is no pain, 10 is the worst pain possible, and each number in between corresponds to varying levels of increasing pain, we can pick the pain score code and then in this section add different descriptions associated with each of the values 0 to 10. When we click here to add our values, we can see that EMIS has automatically picked up that our values are going to be out of 10. So we'd continue until we have created all the entries and then select from the standard properties list at the bottom and assign the item to the appropriate consultation section. Finally, for this video, we have the yes/no prompt. Drag and drop this into the section you want, and now you can create your yes/no questions and the associated codes to be added to the record. This is a useful component where you have a question with either a yes or no response, but which you want to code whichever response is given. A simple example would be a family history, where you want to code if the patient does have a family history of something, but also code if they don't have that family history. So we write the text of our question, find the code to be added if the answer is yes, find the code to be added if the answer is no, notice that you can change the text of the yes and no prompt if you want to. Complete the properties as appropriate, remembering the mandatory consultation section, and OK. Let's run test template again to see these two components. So we've got the value picking list, which will add the code with the associated value, and the family history yes or no prompt, which if you select yes, will prompt for the family member, which is obviously not required if you select no. Before we finish, let's save and close and take a look at how this works in a real consultation. Run template and select our demo template. Our clinical code component that's mandatory, pre-checked field. If I untick it and try to carry on, notice that the field is highlighted in pink, warning me that I won't be able to save the template until that field is completed. The data field allowing me to select a different date for this specific code. The free text field with the default that I can delete and type over or add to or edit. Our code pick list, which lets me pick more than one from it. And our code browser. The value code picker, giving written descriptions for each of the values. And finally, the yes/no response. Saving the template deposits those codes into the assigned consultation sections. And remember that the data from templates is only actually saved into the record when the consultation is saved. In the next video, we'll look at some of the options for adding non-coded information to the records via templates.